companies to better understand what it takes to be successful, what the challenges are along the way. And we know, I think each of these panelists will be able to talk to this a little bit today, but each journey is unique, and what works for one company may not work for another, but certainly learning the lessons that others have learned along the way can help people avoid some of the pitfalls and challenges that come along with building a company like this. So I think without further ado, and as people join, we'll just bring them in, but I'll give a little bit of background and let the panelists here introduce themselves. First of all, also big thanks to Terry Romero and Susanna Schoolman, who work at FYXX for helping pull all of this together. If you have any problems or any questions, please don't hesitate to ping either of them or myself during this event so that we can help you out. And with that, I'm going to introduce our three panelists. I'm going to give a very brief overview of the format, and then we're going to get going. So today, what we're going to do is with do this, not that, which is somewhat antithetical to how we try and run the accelerator, is give you some lessons. So we've got a couple of questions that we have thought about that we think will be helpful to give you some insight into how each of these three entrepreneurs have done things that work and things that may not have worked in the journey of their company thus far. And so with us today, we have Ori Zohar of Burlap and Barrel. They source unique, beautiful spices for professional chefs and home cooks. Sheetal of Reveal, the avocado seed brew, an upcycled, ready-to-drink beverage rich in antioxidants with 0 sugar and less than 15 calories per bottle. And they recently launched in the Philadelphia area and direct-to-consumer just less than a month ago or so. Always interesting to launch in the middle of a pandemic, right? And then Park of FYXX Health, whose platform for food is medicine, hides the healthy stuff and the fun stuff to deliver delicious, simple, functional food. So with that, what I'd like each of you to do is maybe spend 1 minute, 2 minutes talking just a little bit about your background and your company, because I know I can't have possibly covered it all in those intros. So why don't we start, Sung, you're the top of my screen here. I don't know what everyone else is seeing, but why don't we start with you and just introduce yourself and FYXX Health.
Sure. Nice to meet you guys. My name's Sung Park. I'm with FYXX Health, and this is probably, I don't know, my 10th startup. I've really enjoyed the FYXX program. And as Peter said, our mission is to use food as medicine to cure chronic diseases. Really, our mantra is, what if a donut were good for you? And so we're pursuing that particular path, and happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Great. Ori, would you like to go next?
Yeah, and thank you for joining me in this sterile conference room. My name is Ori Zohar, the co-founder of Burlap and Barrel. We source single origin spices directly from smallholder farmers across the world. We work with farmers in 14 countries. We pay them more, we set them up to be their own direct exporter, which never happens. And the result is really high quality, really flavorful spices that we sell to food manufacturers, home cooks, restaurants, and everybody in between. This is our 4th year in business. And so we're building that up. And yeah, we're really excited. We went from 50% restaurants and 50% direct to consumer to 95% direct to consumer in the past few months. And so that's been quite a shift. So happy to talk about all of that.
Excellent. And Sheetal, last but not least.
Hi, thank you for having me here today. I am the founder and CEO of Reveal, or Hidden Gems Beverage Company. Still kind of getting used to how to introduce my company, but the idea behind our company is that we take upcycled ingredients or the parts of food that somebody would have thrown away to create absolutely new products which have never been seen before in the world. And our first attempt at that is Reveal Avocado Seed Brew. We've been working on the idea for 2 years, but we just managed to launch last month in the middle of the pandemic, which has been fun. And I guess I have a lot of stories to talk about in my journey as an entrepreneur.
Excellent. Well, with that, I think one thing that the audience should understand is that all three of these companies are at slightly different stages in their journey. So some a little further along, some a little earlier, but all have had some ups and downs and interesting stories already. So with that, I'm going to start with you, Sheetal. Looking back on the earliest days of the company, what is one thing that stands out to you that you wish you had not done, or that you would have done differently had you understood at the time what you were doing?
Yeah, I think mine is going to be about not getting married to ideas. And one of the things that very early on, for us, we were really flexible with the format of what we were going to do with the avocado seed brew. So it started out as a tea bag and eventually ended up as a ready to drink beverage. But the one thing that we did get married to was the name. So we had a name which was Avo, and we used it everywhere. And we went to a trademark lawyer to get it trademarked, and our trademark lawyer said, like, oh, there's no way you're going to get that. You should change your name. And we were like, no, we're going to change the lawyer. And so we went to 7 different lawyers to figure out how we can potentially use this name that we had fallen in love with. And eventually, you know, after like 1.5 years, we did have to give up on that name. And rebranding, even for a tiny company that like nobody knows, you don't even have a product in the market, was so painful. So I can't even imagine what it would be like to have to change an idea after you've launched. And I think one of the things that I wish and I hope for everyone is that, like, when lawyers start to tell you don't do something, or like when consumers start to tell you that like this is not a good format, to actually listen. And I really wish I hadn't gotten married to ideas.
So flexibility would be the important message there. And out of curiosity, when did you first approach a lawyer about the trademarking? Was it early on, or had you already gone down a certain path at that point?
Well,
The first lawyer.
Yeah, so the first, like, how this idea kind of started very organically. It was like we were still in university, and we would go and we would attend a lot of events. And I think it was the first event, it was just like, oh, what do we call ourselves? Like, oh, we'll call ourselves Avo Tea. And before we knew it, like, we hadn't thought about it at all, but before we knew it, like, everyone on campus already knew who we were. And like that, after everyone already knew who we were, we went to a lawyer. We're like, hey, listen, this is what we want to do. And the lawyer was like, no, you're not going to get that name. So I think maybe a little bit of thought process too around the name, and like some research around how you're going to actually build this out into a brand before you go advertise it to everyone would be also some advice that I would definitely give myself when I was starting out.
Excellent. Ori, let's go to you next. And I know that, like Sung, you have, this is not your first rodeo. So you've done other startups in the past, but both in thinking about Burlap and Barrel in the early days, you guys have been in business for several years now. Are there any decisions that you look back on and say, you know, why did we do that? Or were there any lessons as well from your earlier company that you were able to bring to your experience at Burlap and Barrel that helped you avoid those types of problems?
Yeah. My last company was a company called Syndio, and it was a mortgage company. It's the classic, you know, finance to food transition that everybody loves. But that was a venture-backed company. And I think, like, back then, like, the goal was to raise, like, venture funding was a celebration of like, oh, look at how much money we raised. And now I look at it like, oh my God, how much of my company did we sell to get what? And so we were under this like crazy revenue pressure to just grow as fast as we could. And we often succeeded in growing at a loss. And so, like, it was this, like, it felt like we were building a car, but without an engine. And so it felt like everything was a little bit upside down. We raised $32 million in that company. And that seems like a lot of money, but once you have an engineering team and a marketing team and a this and a that, like, it really made it, I think I made a lot of the mistakes in that company so that I wouldn't have to make them again in this company. And I think some of those things, you only have to make the mistake once before you're like, okay, I get it. That was so painful that I don't need to do it again. But employees are incredibly expensive. And I think many companies end up hiring too early, especially when it comes to the sales function. When they're like, oh, I'll just hire a salesperson and they'll just sell my genius idea. What could go wrong? But I think oftentimes the founders are the best salespeople. And in fact have to be, because it's your baby. Same thing with PR. We're like, oh, I'll just give this to a PR company and they're just going to go scream it from the rooftops. And it's like, no, as a founder, you're going to be much better at doing PR, at doing the sales and all of that. And so I think very often people or hiring this incredible design agency and say, I'm going to build this website and it's going to blow everybody away and my sales are going to go through the roof. And oftentimes just what a successful business looks like is not what we think that it looks like, this bright, shiny thing with a team of people working against it. You can get so much further by yourself. We're 4 years in. We're still 2 full-time people, and we do work with a fulfillment center, and we do, because why would we build a 100,000 square foot warehouse and buy racks and this and forklifts and whatever? We have a packing facility that we send them our jars and our labels. And so we've been able to get really, really, really far without having to hire and while still being bootstrapped. And so I learned those lessons by doing it the exact opposite way in the previous startup. And that was 4 years in that company of really intense, constantly almost the plane almost crashing into the ground, and constantly trying to save it, and an infusion coming from an investor and make compromising here and compromising there. And for some companies, venture capital is an incredible path to go, and that can lead you to take over the world in a really short amount of time. I haven't figured out how to navigate it. And so being able to do a bootstrapped company where we were able to kind of stay small, stay focused, and grow organically and protect our profit margin at all costs was something that it took me a lot of doing it wrong to figure out how to do it right with Burlap and Barrel.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we often ask companies, what is the company that you want to build? Ask the founders, what is the company you want to build? And I think when you think about it in the context of your lessons, that's an important part, is what do you want your company to look like at the end of the day? So Sung, moving to you, same question, what did you do early on that perhaps in retrospect you wouldn't have done? And again, you're a multi-time founder, so are there things that you learned in the past that have helped you as you transitioned from other industries into building a food company?
Yeah, there's probably 100 things. So, we view startups as a race against insolvency. And you're just a pile of pivots until you get to break even. So the way we think about all these pivots, though, is we view everything as an experiment, and we have what we call hard values and soft values. And Sheetal was getting to a little bit of that. To us, a hard value is, does the product work? Is it safe? Would we take it? Would we give it to our kids? And then the third one is, does it taste great? So we never shift from there, but we view everything else as a soft value. Brand name, what the product format is it a donut? Is it a cookie? Is it a powder? We don't care about that. Distribution channel, we're very flexible on that. Messaging, we're flexible on that. Branding, we're very flexible on that. So we view those as a series of experiments to run through to get to our path to success, but we try to never sway from our hard values.
And what do you think when you think about the development of those hard values? Did those come to you in the middle of the night and you started the company based on them? Or were those things that in the earliest days you tested and you sort of felt like this is what we need to be about as a company as we grow this?
So 2 of the 3 were right from the very beginning. 1, the stuff had to work, and 2, it had to be safe. The taste great evolved as we came down through the epiphany, which was we came out, one of the original positions was very science-based. We worked with the Harvard Med School genomics department. And it turns out that nobody actually gave a crap about that. And we then came to the epiphany of, we have this hard line, we call it the kale line. There's people who eat kale and people who don't eat kale. And our peeps are the people who don't eat kale. So if you're the kale eater, you're already doing the right things. Our peeps are the people who are eating potato chips and French fries and cookies. And that's who we were going to try and fix because they had the biggest set of problems. So suddenly we said, oh, we need to make, it's actually easier for us to make food be healthy than it is for us to change human behavior. And that was a big epiphany, and that's what drives our taste hard value.
For sure, with the exception of perhaps a pandemic, it's very hard to change consumer behavior, whereas a pandemic can change global behavior overnight.
Well, one of the big pivots was we developed a immunity booster, and we showed it to our first retailer, and they looked at it and they said, "Well, how many do you have in inventory?" And we told them, and they said, "Well, we'll take it all." And that was a good epiphany for us and a good pivot for us.
That's a good moment.
Yeah, being on the e-commerce side, the pandemic's actually helped us.
Yeah, I think I would imagine I see shaking of heads. I think that's true for everybody. If you've got a product that is works well in a direct to consumer format, then this has been an interesting ride for you. And I'm sure, Ori, I know you can talk about that because we talked about it back in probably May. But let's flip this around a little bit, and I'm going to go back to you, Sheetal. We've talked about the negative. Let's talk about the positive. Is there a decision that you've made thus far in the company that you look at and you say, wow, I'm so glad that we made that decision, because it was either a turning point for us or a jumping off point that brought us to some next level that we were looking for?
Yeah, I think the good thing that we did was like I said, we started out like a tea bag, and the best thing that I can say that we've ever done was to go to attend as many possible events as we could, and put our product in front of people. And that was one of the things that I always worried about. Like, I'm going to take this product and I'm not actually available for sale. I can't actually sell this. Like, I had all of these doubts, but the amount of insight that I gathered by just being at the table and like giving my product to somebody and seeing what their reactions were like really detailed how we brought this brand to life. So like, I feel like all of the little details of like, okay, why are you in a glass bottle and not in a can? It was because when we would go to events and we would tell people this is an avocado seed brew, a lot of times their first reaction was like, oh, so is it green? Like, like a murky green color. I'm like, no, it's actually really beautiful. And then the same kind of reactions around like upcycled food being ugly or gross or disgusting. And we put it in a glass bottle because you can see through it and you can see for yourself that it's not any of those things. And then even in terms of flavor profile, it was something that we were really careful was to go and see. So the first variation of this beverage had lemon juice and sugar in it. And when we started taking it out to people, like they were like, oh, okay, fine. It's like cool. It's like iced tea, whatever. But one of the things that we started hearing as we started talking to customers is they were looking at like, oh, you know what would be really cool? Like, I love the idea of drinking kombucha, but I just can't end up drinking it because it's too much flavor. Like, it's too much for me. It's like the carbonation plus all of this other like vinegar flavors. So then we slowly pivoted towards like, using apple cider vinegar in our formulation instead of lemon juice, and reducing the amount of sugar in it. And that's kind of when we found that people were really excited about the product. So I think that was the best decision that we made, was to go to events regardless of whether we had branding, we didn't have packaging, we didn't like have a perfect formula, like we didn't have anything pinned down, which really helped us change from event to event. And I would do that decision like 100 times over.
So you took a little bit of a lean startup model, but to the food space. So doesn't matter if it's perfect, let's get it out there and see what people think and hear with our own ears what the reaction is.
Yeah.
Ori, what about you? Talk a little bit about, I'm sure there's some decisions that were key that helped Burlap and Barrel become sort of the beloved brand it is today with professionals and home chefs alike. What do you look back and think of as one or a couple of those key decisions along the way that you look back on positively?
Yeah, this is something, we went through the Techstars Accelerator, and this was one thing that we really fought with them a lot on, was we said that we wanted to have multiple lines of spice. We wanted to sell to chefs and to home cooks. And all the kind of advice was like, those each are two separate businesses. Like, don't focus on them all. And they're like, we also want to sell to food manufacturers. And they were like, are you insane? So there are two of us. We have 4 lines of business. And that seemed really counterintuitive, but it made sense to us. We have our half-cup jars of the spices in glass jars. We sell cases of 12 of those jars to grocery stores. we sell them in 1 pound containers that are typically a quart. And these quart containers typically hold a pound to food service and also to home cooks that just move through volumes and want a better deal on it. And then we have 25 kilogram bulk sacks that we send. And everybody told us that we were insane, but it's the same spices. And so speaking of hard values versus soft values, I really like that way of framing it. Like, we were bringing in the spices from the farmers. If we could sell 25 kilogram sacks, like, you know, why not? That just means that our volume goes through faster. The cost of importing the spices gets spread out over a much larger shipment. We can send more money to our partner farmers. And so for us, we always wanted to do more direct to consumer, but we wanted to do it in a profitable way. We didn't want to spend 100% of our revenue on acquisition. We didn't want to have to do too much through grocery stores, or maybe, you know, we'd have to, like, really, they would get kind of the lion's share of the revenue. And so we started in food service at restaurants because my co-founder used to work in restaurants in New York before he became an aid worker. And so what we started doing is we started doing with restaurants, and then just as people were asking for stuff, we started to kind of grow, like just pack in other sizes, and it ended up just working really, really well. And so now we have, you know, like Lush buys our turmeric and uses it in their, like, you know, bath bombs and all this. I thought it would color you orange, but they assured us it doesn't. And so they're buying in bulk, and that's helping us with volume. Food service is putting us on the menu at some reputable restaurants and having kind of chefs endorse us, which helps with home cooks. Grocery stores, which we only do specialty stores, helps people discover the product. And then the direct to consumer is our highest margin channel, and is the way where we have this, like, amazing audience that we can say, hey, guess what? We're launching X, Y, and Z. We'd love for you to check it out. And so we have this really amazing relationship with the home cooks, that whether it's on our site, in our forum, there we've had over 3,000 reviews on the site. And so, like, all these things have kind of supported one another. And on one hand, that seems like it's 4 different businesses that we're running with only 2 full-time employees. But really, it all just kind of worked together. Like, we can pack the sack into jars or into food service containers, or we can just sell it as is. So it was really much less of a difficult pivot, or much less of a difficult, like, stratification of our business. And instead, we were able to kind of serve a much broader audience while we were still figuring out who we wanted to be when we grow up. Maybe we'll always do bulk, maybe we won't, but we're just trying to figure that out. And then when the pandemic hit and things shifted in a meaningful way, our direct-to-consumer channel, which we've been working on for 3 years, was ready to absorb all that traffic and all that interest. And so it wasn't like, you know, getting caught flat-footed and being like, oh my God, now we have to sell directly to consumers. And so that ended up being a really strong, like, a point of strength rather than a point of, like, distraction or weakness for us. And so we're really grateful that we ended up going in that way.
Well, let me ask you, when you were having those discussions, when advisors or people around you were saying, you know, do this, not that, how did you think about the decision-making process? How did you and Ethan come together to decide, okay, we know we're hearing this from other people, but whether it's in our gut or our heart, or we have data that tells us otherwise, how did you feel that you went about making that decision and determining what was the right path when you were hearing something else?
Yeah, we wanted to be open to hearing feedback from anyone. You know, everybody, including our parents, had so much feedback for us over what we should do and what we shouldn't do. I think for us, we always had like an idea of the business that we wanted to build, and that was really clear to us. And we're a public benefit corporation, and our public benefit is to connect smallholder farmers to high value markets. And so we had a few things that were like our like true north, you know, of like what we want to do. So if it supports farmers, if it, you know, like if we're able to kind of get whatever customer excited about it, like if enough people are asking for it, then like it feels silly for us to be like, no, we don't do that. No, thank you. Like if it was within our reach to be able to do that. And so we just kind of had our strategy of how all these kind of parts of the business could help each other. And we started with just restaurants and direct to consumer. And then eventually we added in grocery because we're like, oh, we pack these into cases of 12 anyways. And that seems to be what grocery stores want. And then we had a few people saying, I don't want 50 of these like plastic containers. Can you sell me the sack? And eventually we're like, yeah, we can sell, like, so it just kind of felt like a really natural and organic evolution for us. And limiting ourselves, it seemed like an unnecessary, like it seemed like an unnecessary way to limit ourselves. And I think the other point is that we had a lot of conversations with people outside of the like venture community and outside of the direct to consumer and all that. We talked to a bunch of other like spice companies. We talked to bean companies. We talked to tea companies and chocolate companies and, you know, coffee companies. And they just like the people that, I know we looked a lot at people that were like 3 to 5 years ahead of us, and we valued their opinions. a lot more than the people that are like, because we didn't want to exit. We don't like, if we get to do this for 20 more years, that's an excellent outcome for us. And so for us, we just tried to find more people that were in roles and in companies that looked like that and seek out their advice, than to seek out people that like were like, yeah, we'll just put in $10 million. So for 100, like that was never our path. And so we knew that. And so we also kind of went to reach out to people that really kind of were living that life that we wanted to, and had built companies in the style that we wanted to build. And there's so many inspirational companies, from Equal Exchange to even like, we got to talk to Ben from Ben and Jerry's to hear like, why did they sell and what happened? And when, you know, like, so there's so many cool people out there that were more than willing to give us kind of spend the time with us. And we were really grateful for that. So that helped us kind of sort things out and make the decision that we wanted to make.
So getting a real variety of input from people across different stratas within the industry and even outside. So Sung, finally, let's pose the same question. You know, I know that as you discussed earlier, you've tested a lot of things. Was there any one decision or one or two decisions that you feel like helped really crystallize what you were doing along the way, and that you look back on as points of real light in the journey thus far?
Yeah, I would say by far the best decision I made was bringing on my co-founder, Jill. I mean, she's the exact opposite of me. She's hardworking, she's smart, she's good looking. So, but she does complement, she has a great skill set. And so what I would say is, you know, look for your weaknesses and then complement them with your team members. And she really provided the boost that we needed to get the company off the ground. So that was by far the best decision we made.
Funny, I feel like we've heard know thy audience or know thy customer, and also know thyself in this. So two sort of always useful pieces of data. So with that, let's go. We've got a couple of questions from the audience. So why don't we start with those? And I would encourage anybody else in the audience to ask any questions that you're interested in. And it looks great that some of these have gone to specific people. So I'm going to start from, and I'm going to totally butcher the name, Loic, I hope is not totally wrong. For Ori, curious to know more about what you put in place to guarantee consistency from batch to batch, since you've got specific botanicals coming from far away places.
Yeah, so you have to build into your model the fact that we're working with agricultural products. There's going to be consistency things. There's going to be quality things. Every so often, when we were bringing a shipment from Zanzibar, the exporters wanted us to bribe them, and we didn't. So when the sacks arrived, they'd slashed a few sacks of cinnamon open. And so, you know, we had to dispose of those. And so we built it in, but it's basically like how we work with the farmers. So the farmers that we work with are smallholder farmers. They're super ambitious. They're super entrepreneurial. They're really kind of clever and ambitious and like really incredible people. And so, like, let's say somebody cheats us or gives us something less than we expected or whatever. We're not going to take a farmer in rural Vietnam to court, or like, all we have to, the relationship is really at the basis of what makes all this work. So we need to make sure that we're paying them a significant premium to the commodity market so that we're their favorite and best customer. And we communicate with them a lot, both on so many farmers send spices away and they don't even know, like, where are black peppercorns being used? Where is the cinnamon arriving? What is the dish that people are cooking it in? And so we're constantly talking to them. And even now I'm at our packing facility in Geneva, New York right now. And so we received a batch of star anise that just wasn't dried enough. And so it was moldy. So what do? My co-founder and I put on gloves and hand sorted 55 pounds of it. We received a batch of coriander that wasn't fragrant enough. And so we went through that. So we give the feedback to the farmers. We're working with them. We're talking to them about things. And some farmers are like, you know, we have all the safety procedure on our end of like finding metal, finding glass, finding like anything else that could potentially be a safety. We have all that process, but then we talk to the farmers. And so in Egypt, we talked to the farmers with the coriander and said, hey, what happened? Like, what happened in this batch? And they'll either say, oh, here's what happened. We're sorry, here's how we're going to address it. Or they say, nothing happened. what's wrong on your end? And those end up being partner farmers that we end up not working, you know, for a long time with. We had one partner farmer that we found metal in it. And we said, hey, not acceptable. And they said, we think your metal detector is a little bit too sensitive. And we said, we think we're done working with you. And so it's just about kind of building in just like enough in our budget that if we just have to, like, I build in like a markup on all of our sourcing spices to just make room for stuff gets stuck in customs for a week. Stuff gets, you know, we have to pay $100 a night to like basically hotel it. Stuff comes in. So we just have this like built in, but really it's about the relationship with the farmers. And if we have a good relationship with them, even if something off happens, we end up talking to them. And the other point, by the way, is our customers know that stuff sells out. Like everywhere else, spices are just a thing that's always in stock in the same way and all that. And we talk about spices as seasonal. When we bring in our cumin from northern Afghanistan, there's a once a year harvest. So we try to bring in enough to last us for the year. If that happens, great. If it doesn't happen, then we sell out and we say, hey, guess what? The next harvest is coming in a few months. And so we talk to people around kind of thinking about spices as plants and seeds and bark and fruits and nuts. And I think that ends up kind of increasing the appreciation for it.
And it sounds like in terms of thinking about every business, it's modeling in for, you have your level of quality and consistency that you shoot for, and you know that to get there is probably a little bit of a bumpy road in certain ways. So you've modeled for that so that at the end of the day, the consumer sees consistency, even if you're dealing with that inconsistency along the way.
There's going to be some waste. There's going to be some inefficiencies. You're going to make some wrong bets. And if that's not built into your model, then you're going to be so stressed out every time that something doesn't go exactly right. And the other point is also treating your suppliers as partners, because they hold so much of like that, you know, they hold your product in their hands so much more often than you will. And so like right now, this is our third day at our packing facility, and we're meeting the team and we're sitting and chatting with them, and they know so much better about how to like make the whole process work more smoothly. And they're also the front line for ensuring that something is coming in and the right quality. If something comes in and it looks off, they raise their hand and say, hey, we're not packing this. This doesn't look right. This doesn't look like the rest of it. And we trust them in a really deep way, but that only comes from spending time with them, working alongside them, packing boxes yourself, you know, doing all that stuff. It's not this thing that happens in the background while we sit and just all day long write emails. It's really about, you know, reaching much further out and really being a lot more attentive to all the steps ahead of where the product, you know, hits our customers' kitchens.
Got it. Our next question comes from Sydney McLeod, and it's for everyone on the panel. If you have a business idea as an entrepreneur for food products, but you're not a food scientist, you don't have a background in chemistry, what would you suggest is getting to get a product started, or finding the correct formulation or ingredients for that? Oh, Sheetal, you're muted.
Oh. Should I answer that one?
Sure.
I can start at least. So I am actually a culinary scientist. I went to school for this. So my suggestion, and you might be surprised by how often there's not really that much science that goes into building a food product. So if you can have a recipe that you make at home and you really enjoy and you like it, and then that's what you would call like your gold standard recipe. And then the idea is to find out if you can manufacture something which is almost similar to what you've got. So other than like, there might be some scientific details around like what the pH should be, what kind of, like how much water content can be in your product. And that is something that you can talk to a food processing authority about. But other than that, at home by yourself without spending a ton of money, you can actually start reaching out to people that, like, if you're looking for, say, a tomato puree, like you can start talking to companies that sell that for bulk and kind of request for samples and see if that product works for you to make something that's really similar to your gold standard formula. And then once you've got all of that together and you kind of have a generic idea of what you want your product to taste like and what that process would be like to make it at a larger scale, that's when I would talk to a food process authority who can help you figure out what the pH should be, how you should pack it, and like put in all of these details for you, which then can take you on to the next levels of saying like, okay, this is the kind of co-packer that I need, or this is the kind of facility that I need. But a great way to start, especially if you're starting small, is just get a commercial kitchen, have your process authority, and get started that way.
And Sung, I'm going to throw it to you on that same question, but I'd also just put a plug in for another FoodX company called Fieldcraft. If you look up fieldcraft.com, is a marketplace for ingredients. So if you're looking for the right ingredients, that's a good place to start as well. But Sung, you are not a food scientist, and so you dealt with this exactly. You went out and found people to work with. So how would you address that?
You know, we brought in a lot of the expertise. We've got a lot of friends who are food scientists. I have run a beverage company before. We were working with the Harvard Med School people. We were working with, we have an in-house nutritionist, Stacy Kennedy. She's got a lot of experience in the food space. So the other area, if you find the right co-packer, they are very good to lean on.
Got it.
Yeah. And I can also add one quick thing. There's a lot of cottage industry laws across the food industry where you can kind of legally get things started in your home. So our first year, my co-founder registered his living room as a spice processing facility. And so we brought stuff in there and packed out of his apartment and went to IKEA and built shelving and all this and that. And so legally, so you can get kind of the business off the ground, especially now during the pandemic. So many people are looking to support local businesses. I think you can kind of get things off the ground and even kind of like mess around and get a beta going and see what goes on. You have to label it specifically to say that it's a cottage industry, that it's not subject to like the larger oversight. But I think you can kind of push and get started without too much. And then obviously you don't want to like mass produce and then all of it molds and like, you know, that could be a really expensive mistake to make. But to get stuff out of your kitchen to start serving your local community is much more possible than most people think.
Now, another question we've got that came in is around asking for help. When did you realize that you needed to extend your network beyond where it was and network to find solutions to problems? Was it, and how did you think about solving that when you hit that point? Anyone jump in?
For me, I had just moved to this country and I was in grad school. I didn't have money, I didn't have a network, I didn't have anything when I got started. So my first instinct was to talk to people that I knew that I could, like, you know, I would talk to professors, I would talk to anybody that would talk to me and tell them like, oh, this is my idea, this is what I want to do. Do you happen to know someone that could help me, give me advice, point me in the right direction, give me a contact? And honestly, the entire network that I've built over the last 2 years has just been a function of just that, you know, realizing that like, oh, now I'm going to need lots of avocado seeds to experiment with my idea. Where am I going to get it? So I called restaurants. I was like, hey guys, like, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Can I come by and pick up your avocado seeds? And actually those relationships were they were like life-changing. And so many people were willing to help me when I never thought that they would. So I would say that like the minute that you need something, I think just start looking for people, and these people become like, you know, cheerleaders in your corner. You can always go back to them and they're always excited about, you know, the progress that you've made, and that also builds out your community. So I would say start asking for help as soon as you need it.
Song or Ori, any thoughts on that?
You know, the one of the universal areas that I noticed across a lot of the cohorts was finding good co-packers. So having resources like Mark Castellana there was just fantastic. The other area that really helped us was being able to hit up guys like Alex French. He is just a wealth of knowledge on the Amazon marketplace and helped us kind of untangle what worked and what didn't work without us having to find out in a very expensive fashion.
And we've got one last question here, and then we'll close it out. Also from Loic, for Sheetal, the more, you know, on scaling strategy, says he'd love to brainstorm, but the more complex your formula is, the harder it is to scale. Using compounds could be great. Have you thought about that, and how do you think more generally about the scaling of a relatively complex product, even though in its base it's fairly simple?
Yeah, I think like for us, figuring out the standards of this avocado seed brew was a process in itself, just because there was no guidelines. We didn't know what test there was. Like, it didn't have a bricks, like we couldn't measure it on bricks because it was the same as water. So, I mean, trying to figure out what that section was, especially in this brand new space, was a challenge. And I think with scaling, there's obviously every product is going to have its own issues. Like even with avocado seeds, our issue is that they're really heavy. So trying to figure out how to scale that, we're still learning through that process. So we've just worked our way up to being able to do like a 200-gallon batch, and it takes forever. So we've only gone into production twice. So our next time we're like trying to figure out how to do this at like a much faster way. And I think that at every point, we're just gonna have to just get creative, talk to the people that we're working with. So we work out of the Rutgers Food Innovation Center. And every time after like we do a production run, the entire team sits together and everyone gives us every single suggestion that they can possibly think of. And then we like take meticulous notes and we go back and we're like, okay, this is what we can do. And like the first scale up that we had, it took us 2 days to complete doing like 3 products. And the second time, after listening to everyone's feedback and suggestions, we were able to do all 3 products in a single day. And the next time we're looking at like scaling that up and going to like a larger level. So I think with every product, it's going to be completely different, but I think just work with the people that you've got and kind of figure out your way, because there's not really a set rule or a principle. Like for us, compounds probably won't work because we're creating an extract from the avocado seed. So that is the challenging part, and nobody makes that, which is why we're in the position that we're in. So I think that with other people, they might be able to do that, and maybe potentially one day we'll be able to sell avocado seed compounds to people, and then they can use it in their beverage, and it'll make their life easy. But we have to learn how to do that.
Excellent. Well, I'm gonna ask for one last answer from each of you, and 2 things. One is tell everybody where they can get your product, and 2, name one resource that's been helpful that people could look into, whether it's something like Rutgers Food Innovation Center or somebody out there that if they're starting out, this could be helpful to them. Sheetal, why don't you kick us off?
Okay, I have a couple of suggestions. So the first is, if you're looking to get started, Rutgers Food Innovation Center is perfect. They can help you with the whole process from taking your idea into scaling up to actually getting it into production, which I would highly recommend talking to that team. They're amazing. And my second suggestion is going to be to check out this Facebook group called OMG CPG. It's fantastic. There's so much cool content on there. So I'm on there all the time. So, and I've met so many people from there. So I would recommend that.
And they can get it at Drink Reveal.
Oh, right. The second part of the thing, you can, well, if you're in Philadelphia, you can get our product right now on GoPuff. Otherwise, we're launching our direct-to-consumer in October. So definitely sign up for our mailing list on drinkreveal.com, and then we'll be available through the country.
Excellent. Thank you, Sheetal. Ori? And I know it sounds like you were going to talk about OMG CPG as well, by the way you shook your head there.
For sure, but yeah, I seconded that's a great resource, but I have another resource. I'll come up with other stuff. You can get our spices at burlapandbarrel.com. We just launched these cute kitchen towels, and if you end up picking up spices and adding those to your cart, you can use the code FORUM, and they will be free instead of $7. Okay, that's not the most important thing. So I think that in general, one thing that's been really helpful for us from the beginning to the end is we just add people on LinkedIn. Like whenever there's a company that we want to reach out to, or somebody even in a role that we think would be helpful to us, we just add a bunch of people that do that on LinkedIn. Maybe 30% will accept our invitation, and maybe 10% will like accept our message and request to connect. But we've gotten in touch with King Arthur Flour through that, Equal Exchange, Cabot Creamery. Like we've just reached out to all these different folks and just said, this wasn't a sales thing. It was like, can you give us advice? I love Rancho Gordo, the dried heirloom beans. They're the best. We reached out to Steve Sando to help him to be a mentor when we were like, you made a pretty meaningful company off of dried beans. Maybe we can learn about you if we want to make a company off of spices. And he was really kind and really sweet to us. And over time, he ended up actually including some of our cumin in his bean club, which like made our 2019. Like nothing better could have happened that year. So my point is we've just been reaching out, and people seem relatively receptive for like a mentorship or advice conversation over LinkedIn. Even what's that awesome Castile soap that's with all the religious quotes on it.
Dr. Bronner's?
Yes, Dr. Bronner. We reached out to we got to have coffee with the head of sustainability there, and like how cool and eye-opening of a conversation that was. And that was all just by like reaching out and adding people on LinkedIn. So that was really cool and opened a lot of doors. And then the second or third conversation, they're like, wait, what do you do? Maybe there's some way that you can do something for us, and it just ends up eventually developing into a business conversation. But even if it didn't, just the advice and just support from them is more than enough.
Excellent. Sung, last but not least, I'll let you.
Sure. Our website is fixxhealth.com, FYXX Health.com. We only have a couple of test products on there. We're in development right now. We finished some candies. We're at co-packers right now for soda. We're at co-packers right now for cookies and brownies. And then we're working on burritos and bean dips and a variety of other products. So it's kind of the first step in the water. We've got some gut health stuff. We've got some inflammation stuff. So it's just going to be a steady stream. I agree with Ori that LinkedIn is a phenomenal resource. The other group that we found was really interesting is, I think it's called NFX. It's a little group. It's a venture group out in San Francisco, and they have a comprehensive list of all investors and what stage they're interested in, and the name of the person. And so they'll say, yeah, this person does consumer seed, 100,000 to 300,000. And this person does consumer and loves food and does Series A at 2 to 4 million. And it's a very long, comprehensive list, and it's phenomenal for targeting. There's literally hundreds of investors listed name by name. And we thought that was a very interesting list of people to find.
That's great. I just shared that link for, I think you're talking about Signal from NFX.
Yeah, that's
I just shared that link. Last thing, and first of all, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for your time today, all the attendees for coming out. Applications are open for FoodX. Terry shared a link there if anyone's interested. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. But again, everyone's journey is a little different, as we've heard today. And this will be the first of what we hope are our regular series of FoodX events on different topics. So thank you, Sung. Thank you, Ori. Thank you, Sheetal. Thank you, everyone who helped get this set up. And we hope to have you again for the next one. So thanks, everybody.